Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Claudia, and in today's video we're going to take a look at a watercolor speed paint. I watercolored the last piece that I did for Inktober, which was for the prompt crawl, and this one was a bigger piece, like an A4, and I did a lot of peonies. Peonies are actually my favorite flowers to color in. And I was thinking initially that this is going to take me quite a long time. Usually these big pieces take a long time. However, I did a little bit of a trick this time, and I stuck with the same color palette. So I just choose 3 colors and I stuck to that through the entire piece, and this really made it much faster. I usually get sidetracked whenever I'm watercoloring something, and I try to use all the colors possible, but this makes it much longer process. So just because I stuck to the same colors, I made it much faster. So I hope you are enjoying this speed paint, and I'm going to have a more longer commentary on the process itself. Surprisingly, this didn't take me so long after I switched to having like one color palette. To go down the memory lane, let's remember I inked this one during Inktober, and I had this idea that there's lots of flowers, lots of potions, like my Inktober was all about potions, and also I wanted to paint my 2 cats in there because they're always going everywhere. Like there are if I have any box or anything that is open, they're trying to get in. So this is like what I was trying to paint here. And I really enjoyed this piece because so many flowers, and it was so nice. For the coloring, I just chose basically Pinata Drawn Rose, a purple, which is I think is Schminke Violet, and the oranges. And the oranges, I think it's transparent orange and some other more redder orange. So I'm trying very hard to mix and match these colors and to make sure that I get the depth. I didn't want to go over. So usually with watercolors, what you do is you work in layers. So you add more and more layers, more and more layers until you get the color that you want. But this time I didn't want that because I knew it would take me a long time, and as with everything else, I don't have all the time in the world to theoretically work on a piece like this. So I had about 3 hours in total that I could actually make this piece, which is normally would have taken me a lot longer to do such a big, like an A4 like this. And the way I fixed it is I mixed the colors directly into the pan. So I have my palette next to me, and I am dipping my brush directly into the pan. I'm adding the color to the edge where it will be the deepest, and then I am pulling with a clean brush the color upwards to make like the gradient. If I'm taking the colors directly from the pan, there are super bright and super, how do you call that? I'm sometimes forgetting the words in English. Very intense colors, right? Normally if you mix them on your palette with water, they become watery, and then you have to add more and more and more things to it. I also tried to film this in a different way. So I was trying to film it from 2 angles so that you can see some things that are more from above, how it will look like, and some things that are from the side. I'm still working on the filming setup, but yeah, I still liked it because I could zoom in on the side and then you could see how I pull the color with the brush. For this time I used the silver brushes. Why? They can hold a lot of color in it, and it also has a round pointed tip, and this really helps in getting into those nitty-gritty parts. I was trying to not color in 2 flowers of the same color next to each other, and that worked perfectly well until the last flower, because it was an uneven number of flowers. So normally I would have had something that you can divide by 3, so that because I had 3 colors, then you know everything will be even. However, that didn't work out because the flower in the middle was the odd one out, so I had to like improvise at the end. Notice here that I've made a decision. I'm going to leave the white of the paper on the curling of the flowers. I didn't want to actually color them in, and that gives it a more dramatic effect in my opinion, because you're not necessarily filling in every little piece of that flower, and you're making it a little bit stand out, and it's going to become more apparent when we're gonna go to the leaves. So this is about the coloring. For me it's very relaxing, so whenever I'm doing this type of coloring, can be very relaxing. I sometimes forget what I'm doing, forget my worries, forget the stuff that I'm dealing with during that day, and I'm just enjoying the process. I'm just adding color and, you know, feeling content that, hey, this is something that I made, and this is something that I did. Now, I think it is important to talk about the paper here. The paper is the thing that makes this piece possible and makes this piece look so nice, and the gradient looks so nice. And the paper I used is Hannemühle. Hannemühle is a German brand of paper. It's 100% cotton, and you usually buy it in a block, but it only has 10 sheets in a block, unlike Arches, which you can buy a block with 25 or things like that. So maybe per page it's a little bit more expensive, but it's really wonderful paper. And I always say that depending on the paper you can do different things. Certain 100% color, watercolor papers, for example Fabriano, they are wonderful for doing things like loose florals, because the grain of the paper is not so big and the brush kind of glides on the paper. The Hannemühle one is so nice paper because the water doesn't absorb immediately into the paper, and then you can do this very smooth gradients. The grain of the paper it's a bit bigger, and I think like if you were to do loose watercolors on it, maybe it wouldn't work so well. But on this kind of illustration style watercolor, or I don't know, modern watercolor things, it works perfectly fine. So it allows you to be able to work with color and drag it around and lift the color off the paper. It's such a good paper for this type of florals and for this type of colors. What is important to note is I'm not using hot press watercolor. I found that hot press watercolor kind of bleeds the color around, so you have to be very careful. In here I can actually do mistakes. I can sometimes add too much water, come back and lift it up with my brush, and it's okay. So it's very forgiving, and the colors, when they dry on this particular paper, they dry at a different intensity. What I noticed, for example, with Arches is wonderful paper, the cold press, but it's very good for very intricate, detailed illustrations. And here I'm talking illustrations. I'm not talking about loose watercolors that a lot of people are doing. I'm talking about really illustrations with lots of objects, lots of tiny things. You get really a lot of control with Arches. So this is why I use Arches for like big illustrations, and florals like this I prefer the Hannemühle paper. And again with Arches I sometimes have trouble, especially on the cold press. I have trouble to do loose watercolor flowers. The grain is too I'm almost talking in Dutch here, too grof, too let's say thick for the cold press. Okay, so it depends. You have to try out different papers. I'm not saying one is better than the other. What I'm saying is that it all depends. It really all depends on what type of illustration you're trying to do and what type of effect you're trying to have. If you want to have like watercolor blooms and things like with structure, the Hanomule is, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get that, because with Hanomule paper I can get a really smooth blend and there's no blooming of it because the paper absorbs differently. Although it's 100% cotton paper, it absorbs differently the paint. So it's really not something that necessarily I always going to recommend this type of paper. It's like what works for me. Another thing to remember whenever you're doing watercolor is that the location where you live or where you're going to paint matters. This works for me. For example, I'm living in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a bit of a different climate. It always rains, super humid, and sometimes can be dry, but not that often. So for me, the watercolors that I use and the paper that I use work for the climate that I have, because it takes different time for watercolors to dry on the paper. It takes different time for everything to be absorbed, and maybe I have a bit more time and more wiggle room to go back and like smooth things over. So depending where you live, like if you live in a very dry climate, then maybe for you the smooth watercolor, like the hot press watercolor, will work perfectly because you're living in a dry climate, so the water dries faster and it doesn't have enough time to spread around and to bleed. And for me, in this type of climate, for example, it doesn't work out and I prefer to use cold press. So my advice on paper is, it is the most important thing that you can buy. Like if you are just starting and just beginning, I think start with a small block of A5, like for example Fabriano or something like that, 100% cotton, and try to do your paintings is the most important thing. Like you can use really cheap watercolors on really good paper and get really nice results, okay? So paper is the most important, but once you go on and once you learn a little bit more, then you have to try to find out what your style of watercolor is. For example, my style is more illustrative. I very rarely do loose watercolors. It's very uncomfortable for me to do loose watercolors because I need to be very precise. This is my personality. This is how I do things. I want to have everything how I want it and with black lines and so on. And this is a style watercolor, but maybe you have a different style and everything around you will dictate what type of paper and what type of paints you use, okay? That's why I prefer, for example, maybe the Schminke watercolors, because these are made here, these are made in Germany, right next to me. It's kind of the same climate, and they a little bit behave differently, and they might the pigment and ratio and the binder behaves differently to the type of climate and continental climate we have here than maybe Daniel Smith, which are made, for example, in the US. I mean, color-wise, they're very similar and very nice, but you have to remember where those colors were tested and where those colors were made. So keep that in mind. Now, let's get back to the painting. I first did all the flowers and they look really cohesive because I used kind of the same colors. The only odd one out was a combination that I did. I mixed a little bit the quinacridone rose that I use for the big flowers with a little bit of orange, and I got this kind of red reddish color, which is like the only flower that doesn't match. And now I'm doing all the leaves. And the leaves I do very simple. I start with May Green from Schminke, and then I put in a darker color. So I wanted, again, a limited palette. I didn't want to go all crazy. I actually swatched all my greens the other day, and I think I have more than 20 green colors. And sometimes it's best to just stick to only a couple, and not do things like that are too out there, because you want the piece to be cohesive and to look kind of the same from any direction you're looking at. Now, this is where it becomes fun. I have these potions there that I left especially for the last, and this was my cat. My cat really likes to paint with me and to sit next to me whenever I'm painting. He sometimes is a troublemaker because he would play with the water, so sometimes I have to be very careful where the water sits so he doesn't put the water down on either the power cords that are next to me or anything else. But anyway, he's a sweetie, so yeah, he always sits there on the desk watching me do. Sometimes he tries to catch my brush and has fun with me, but you know, never mind. Now let's talk about the spider. Why is the spider green? Okay, let's get on with the story. I have a fear of spiders. Okay, I'm gonna get out of it and say it. I'm really trying to get over it, and painting some is a way for me to get out of it. There's nothing. Yeah, I hate them, and every time I'm in the garden, I'm very rarely in the garden because of the spiders. Like, I have a garden and I'm not even using it, but let's put it out there. Sometimes those spiders can be very much camouflage and you don't see them because they are in colors that are so close to the leaves. And I thought that what is the most scary and thing, it was on 31st of October that I drew this, on Halloween, and the prompt was crawl, and I was like, what scares me the most for Halloween? What is the most crawly thing that I could think of? And then that spider that is the color green, that would perfectly go and match the leaves and be hidden in the leaves, is something that scares me the most. Like the other one, the worms and stuff in the potions, they're not that scary for me, but literally that green spider is the scariest thing that I could draw. So that's why it's green. It's like perfectly camouflaged. Now let's get back to the potions. I was trying to figure out what colors would work best with the nice potion. So I did variations of the same colors I used on the flowers, but a little bit different. For example, one of the potions has some flower petals, and I used combination of Gunakado magenta and Potter's pink to have that really pale pink in there. So this is kind of how I stick with the same color palette, but I'm just introducing slightly different ones. For the colors in the potions, I am using a combination that I used on the flowers. For example, for this one I used the same. I use a yellow and the orange that I use for the flowers, and this is like a special potion that just has, like, let's say a fury potion or something like that. For the other potions, I'm going to use very similar colors. So it's always fun. Like this potion with the green is the one that I enjoyed the most. I think I got the colors to blend really well, and this is where again I like the Hanamula paper. I know it's a bit more expensive than most, but it's really nice for blends, and I don't get any blooming when I'm doing this type of blends, and I even put in a lot of water, but there's no blooming in there. So now what else could I say? That I have one, the potion in back, I'm doing it with a little bit of pink, and then I'm deepening a little bit the colors. So the last two potions I was a little bit at a loss at what color should I do, and then I was like, okay, I still have the same color as the flowers, which was the purple, so I'm going to do the moon in there. That potion with the moon inside, I'm going to do with purple, and I was still like not unsure what to do for the last potion, because I didn't have a color. I use a very limited color palette, so I didn't have a color that I didn't necessarily have in there, I didn't have a color that I didn't use, and I didn't want to use the same color over and over again in things that touch each other. So for a while I was like trying to do the small details and trying to think very hard, what can I utilize for that one. And this is what I usually do when I don't know basically what to do. I just take a step back and do small details, and in the back of my mind I'm going to think. In the end, the decision that I made, and I know, okay, I chose a combination of colors that are the same purple and pinks I used, but much more diluted. And the thing in the potion looks like wisps of air or some sort of cloud things in there. I also realized that in the potion that I had above, and I'm really sorry if you're hearing this, I'm hoping that the noise reduction is really reducing the noise, but what they are doing outside is that they are cutting the trees because they have this ash disease or something like that, so they're cutting all the effective branches to ensure that none of the other trees around it get infected. So I apologize, they started really early. It's actually like 7 o'clock in the morning and they're at it. I don't know why they have to start so early, but anyway, I guess that they want to finish early. So where were we? Yeah, coloring. The last part I did was painting the two kids, and my two kids, one of them is orange and he's the male cat that you saw in the video earlier, and the other one is my female cat, and she's like white with black dots, black spots, let's put it this way. So I was trying to see how I can portray that. So I started with a little bit of gray, made her all gray, and then I decided, oh, I probably need to add some shadows to all the bottles with a little bit of gray. So, you know, I was using that gray just to add the shadows, and when the cat was dry, I went in with a much darker color of gray to just do those black spots. I don't necessarily use black, I just use a darker mix of the gray, and you know, that kind of looks like Deet. She's like super cute. I always like her. She's also very tiny, so if you think, oh, why is your cat so tiny in that painting, she is very tiny. She's like half the size of my male cat. I do not know why. She's like a tiny cat. She always has been. She will never grow bigger than she is. When we adopted her, we learned that this is like the size that she's going to get. Anyway, this is about it on this painting. I really enjoyed this one. I probably will sell it as a print as well for whoever wants to buy this. But yeah, see you guys next time, and this is the end. I hope you all enjoyed this speed paint. I for sure enjoyed coloring the peonies, and I've learned so much. I learned how to make the colors a little bit pop, and how I don't necessarily always need multiple layers for my flowers. I enjoyed using the same color palette that I did in the beginning throughout the whole painting, and it was actually a much more relaxing process. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up or a comment, like if you want to see more of this type of content. If you want to see different things that I've done in the same style, here are some videos that you can watch from different playlists that I put together. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and see you next time. Bye!